We are very fortunate to have three distinguished panelists with us today who will discuss the issues raised by the film and answer your questions. Our panelists are Vincent Keys, who is president of the Collier County branch of the NAACP and is involved in many different youth initiatives and is an extremely active member of our community in so many ways. Kathy Shilreff. She was called to St. Monica's Episcopal Church in 2000 and served there for 17 years. She is now retired and assists at St. Mark's on Marco Island. Kathy serves on the Race and Reconciliation Committee of the Diocese of Southwest Florida and has led sessions of Sacred Ground involving 80 people in a 10-part program of dialogue on faith and race developed by the Episcopal Church. And Julie Katz joining us from Atlanta. She is Associate Director of the American Jewish Committee in Atlanta and is an expert on advocacy and intergroup relations. So thank you so much, panelists. A little bit of background about this film. It was actually based on a book. The author was Osha Gray Davidson. And just a brief synopsis to remind you, if it's been a little while since you watched the film, C.P. Ellis grew up in the poor white section of Durham, North Carolina. And as a young man, he joined the Ku Klux Klan. Pardon me while I admit more people from the waiting room. Anne Atwater, a single mother from the poor Black part of town, quit her job as a household domestic to join the civil rights fight. During the 1960s, as the country struggled with the explosive issue of race, Atwater and Ellis met on opposite sides of the public school integration issue. Their encounters were charged with hatred and suspicion. In an amazing set of transformations, however, each of them came to see how the other had been exploited by the South's rigid power structure, and they forged a friendship that flourished against a backdrop of unrelenting bigotry. After seeing the film, you may want to read the book, which is rich with details about the rhythms of daily life in the mid-20th century South. The Best of Enemies offers a vivid portrait of a relationship that defied all odds. By placing this very personal story into broader context, Osha Gray Davidson demonstrates that race is intimately tied to issues of class and that cooperation is possible, even in the most divisive situations, when people begin to listen to one another. So I would like to start out. Also, just one more suggestion, you might want to give yourself to choose the gallery view versus the speaker view versus the gallery view, so you can see the person who's speaking. Vincent, I'll ask you this first question. What has changed since 1971 and what has remained the same?
Race relations, of course. We are still a very much divided country, and in many cities that I have visited, very much a segregated country. And so not much has changed. Still, things remain the same.
It's sad. Kathy, how would you answer that question?
I feel the same. I mean, the schools are more integrated most places, not everywhere, but we still pretty much live in separate neighborhoods and go to different churches.
Mm-hmm. Julie, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, so I think there's actually two specific things that have changed. And the first is the openness of the KKK, of course. It's a lot more shameful to be associated with the KKK openly. That being said, people still harbor racist views, and that can affect a lot of different things. And something that we talk about at AJC quite frequently is what conspiracy theories drive an organization like the KKK. So those are the typical anti-Semitic tropes, like the idea that the Jewish people control the media and control the government and Hollywood. And these were the theories that made the KKK hate the Jewish people. They also adopted the Great Replacement theory, which is the idea that the white race was in danger and therefore minorities were to blame, and they had to stay superior to minorities by committing acts of violence and essentially asserting their place in society. So these are all the conspiracy theories that drove the functioning of the KKK. And while the KKK membership is not as prevalent in today's society, a lot of those conspiracy theories still exist. So this idea, again, that the Jews control Hollywood, the media, the othering of Jews, scapegoating minority groups, all of these things are still quite prevalent in today's society. They're just not particularly affiliated with certain hate groups. They are more widespread. So that's one of the ways that it's changed. And just to add on to the other two panelists about segregation, I think, legal segregation has, of course, been outlawed in most places, although there are still some laws on the books in some places that contribute to legal segregation. But the piece that is still in place is self-segregation. So I think when we discuss racism and segregation, we need to acknowledge that the work is far from done because it's still happening, even if it's not occurring from a legal framework.
Right.
So CP and Anne eventually found commonalities in the film, but as a white man who led a violent hate group and a Black woman fighting for civil rights, they lived very different lives. Did they have a chance to truly reconcile their differences? Julie, would you like to go first?
Sure. It's a really interesting question. I think we have to figure out what reconciliation means. I don't know if we'll ever fully understand each other's experiences, but can we respect the person and their differences, ideally? And actually, I'm going to save the next piece of what I was going to say for the next question, but I think when we talk about today and advocating for fair policies today, we can use this idea of reconciliation in our advocacy and diplomacy.
Kathy or Vincent, do you have a thought about that one?
Well, I think they found that they weren't as different as they thought they were. That there were, obviously the major things, the color was pretty obvious, but both of them, came from poor backgrounds. I mean, they did find, and I think that can happen. And I think the more there are programs that allow that for that kind of conversation and getting to know people who are different from us, it helps.
Mhm.
And if I may add, I do strongly believe that out of reconciliation, we need to take time for education.
Mhm.
The more educated we are and the more understanding we are, I think grow closer together on the issue of reconciliation.
Yep.
I think they learned a lot about each other. CP and Anne grew closer as they learned a little bit more about their backgrounds and how they were brought up and really what they wanted for the next generation, their family. And his CP was very much concerned about his son.
Mhm.
Mhm. Right. And this is a big question that really goes to the heart of this also is, what do reconciliation and healing mean for you? And Kathy, being on this Race and Reconciliation Committee and having led discussions about that, would you like to start us off talking about that?
Well, and I think it's really interesting because, you know, the typical pattern for reconciliation is that there's some kind of confession and some kind of action made to change, and then people can come together. But Dr. Catherine Meeks is the direct founder and director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. And she says healing has to come first, that the people who have been, in this case, Black people, there has to be healing between the races before there can be real reconciliation. And I think she's talking about, you know, the generational trauma and things like all the Jim Crow laws, you know, that were still hurting the Black community because, you know, they don't have homes that have been passed down, property that's come down through generations, didn't have the opportunities for education like after World War II and stuff like that. And, you know, that just continues. And until that is acknowledged by the dominant and the white culture in the United States, until those things are acknowledged, we can't undo what happened, but they have to be acknowledged. And so that there can be some healing on both sides, I think. And then comes reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there still needs to be a lot of education about that whole issue. So
Well,
people don't
education, I
understand.
think Vincent is exactly right. We don't know what we don't know sometimes. But once we know it, we can't, it's hard to unlearn that. So then we have to do something about it. And, you know, in the case of the Episcopal Church, I'll just make a little brag. This whole Sacred Ground, and it's part of a larger program called Becoming Beloved Community. But they're doing a lot on the national level. The church is doing a lot of research and deep study and looking into the past and acknowledging where we have been perpetrators. And, you know, and they've put money behind it, I mean, which is, you know, pretty significant, I think. It makes me happy.
Julie, in your work, do you talk about steps towards reconciliation, or how does that work?
So I'm going to answer a little bit of a different question because I think it'll pivot into what you're asking, but AJC, American Jewish Committee, is a global Jewish advocacy organization, and our goal is to advocate on behalf of the well-being of the Jewish people and all minority groups, because we understand that we cannot be free from discrimination and oppression until all minorities are free from discrimination and oppression. So it's interesting because there's two components to our work. And the first is bridge building, which is building relationships. And the second is this advocacy piece, which is having an end goal in order to accomplish something and ensure that we're reaching our goals as an organization. And these two pieces by themselves are never effective when they are mutually exclusive. So relationship building is so important to be able to get to know other people, other groups, learn about them, educate ourselves, educate others, but it doesn't necessarily have an end goal. And advocacy is important because it's all about that goal of passing legislation or making sure that something that needs to happen happens, but it doesn't have that relationship building inherent within it. And so diplomacy is actually what AJC does, because diplomacy is the bridging of the relationship building and the advocacy. And in order to be a diplomat, you have to have that long-term goal in mind. And in order to accomplish that long-term goal, you have to build those relationships. So the question that we're always asking ourselves is, what is the goal that we are seeking to change? And I think the characters in this film are kind of in the middle of this process of trying to figure out the end goal versus the relationship piece, which is obviously complicated, and how to reconcile those two pieces. And I think that we talk about that all the time in our advocacy work, is how to kind of reconcile the relationship building, the bridge building, and the advocacy, and make sure we're making steps or making choices that are mutually beneficial to both groups, but also with the right intention in mind, because intention is extremely important in advocacy. And I think reconciliation comes when we have intentions that are pure, that are not just about ourselves, but are about the well-being of all of the groups, which is why AJC is not only advocating on behalf of the Jewish people, but advocating on behalf of minorities in general.
Mhm. Vincent?
Well, I just would like to add and compliment Julie on those remarks, because we absolutely need that. But I definitely want us to understand that sometimes, just like the movie, we have to get in the way. And that is get in the way to stand up for what you believe in, to be right, for not only ourselves, but for others as well.
Right.
Yep.
There is a comment in the chat that says, in a biography, CP commented that he found reconciliation was really based on the fact that he and Anne were both poor and were both being abused by the rich whites in Durham. So they found some common ground.
It's interesting, though, CP was, I think, being used by the rich people, like what was he, city councilman, or I don't know,
Mhm.
and or the judge or something. But they agreed on the one thing about integration. They were using CP, but they were in agreement.
Right. In the film, Anne Atwater says, "The same God that made you made me." And that seemed to really be a powerful statement. What did you think of that scene? That was a pivotal scene. Who would like to go first? Kathy?
I just really would like to say, Susan, I think over time in history, we all agree the monolithic way is the way for the world. We don't believe in idle things anymore, and so yes, I think that statement that she made in the film is a classic statement for all to springboard off of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excuse me, it's what I've always believed, but I think in that scene, and part of what made it so pivotal is CP heard it and he couldn't argue with it. Excuse me.
Yes.
Right.
And I think if I can just jump in here, that she said, "The same God that made you made me." And one of my favorite verses is that we are all made in God's image.
Right.
So that speaks to the diversity of it, and is essentially what she's saying, but in a little bit of a different way, that we are diverse by design. and that should be a good thing.
Right.
And something that I am really fascinated by and think is really important when we're talking about issues related to race and related to advocacy is that people are different, and understanding the psychology of how people operate can help us accomplish so much more than just kind of making blanket statements about what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to approach an issue. So for instance, if you know that a elected official really cares about responsible fiscal spending, you're going to talk to them differently than you're going to talk to someone who is more lenient with government spending and wants to accomplish different things. So having an understanding of who your audience is important. And something that I try to adhere to is understanding how people fit into the Big Five personality scale, which is a scientific measurement of personality. It measures openness, extroversion, conscientious, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And basically, it's the idea that someone might be more open than someone else, open to new experiences. So when you look at the film and look at the people who are involved with KKK, part of that is this fear of the status quo changing. And so they might be lower on the openness scale or higher on the neuroticism scale, where they are less emotionally stable and allow their emotions to take over more quickly. So how do we acknowledge the differences and who we're interacting with, and figure out A, how to approach issues, and B, understand who we should reach and who perhaps is not who we should be focusing on. So if someone is more open and more willing to do bridge building, maybe we focus on them as opposed to someone who's either has a personality trait or is in a stage of life where they are not willing to engage with others.
Mhm. So we've talked about bridge building a little bit too, and can you give some examples of in each of your three experiences of some successful ways to do bridge building? Vincent, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll be more than glad to. I want to bring forth the reality of Hurricane Ian and just the cry for the underserved and overlooked. And I believe it's in times like this that people get back to the basics and they reach out to help one another. Now, there may be that time after we get through this traumatic crises that we recently have had, that they may go back to the divisions that we have been operating under. But I think it's through disastrous times like this that the bridge building begins, and we show just how strong we are when we work together.
Mhm. Right. And there's so much need right now. Could simply show up in River Park with a shovel or with some food or something just to help out.
Yes, indeed. And so I'm, number one, so grateful to all that have showed up and looked out for those who don't have the same resources that others have. So it's just a very warming and enlightening experience for us to live through. And I want to say we can accomplish almost anything when we have disastrous moments like this. And I hate to say it takes that for us to come together, but believe you and me, we've done a fantastic job, and there's a lot of work to be done, but we're going to get there. Naples strong, Collier County strong.
Mhm. Right. Kathy or Julie, do you have some other specific examples of bridge building strategies that have worked?
Yeah, I think the most important one is showing up, which sounds so simple, but if you show up, if you physically in person show up in someone's space, they are so grateful. And to expand on that a little bit, the in their space part is actually the most important thing. So oftentimes I think people invite others to join them at their synagogue or their church, and that's really wonderful and great, but it means a lot when someone comes to our synagogue and makes the effort to be in a space that is different from their own, and vice versa. So me going to a church or a masjid and showing that I am willing to be in their space and ask questions, and also just listening. So I think my favorite expression is we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Mhm.
And I really try to live by that in our bridge building and our advocacy, listening more than talking and asking questions more than providing statements, because that helps people feel comfortable and it helps us get to a place where we can really build not only a relationship, but a sincere relationship.
Right, absolutely.
On Marco Island, there's right behind our church, there's a block of homes that are, I think they may all be owned by the same person, and they're rented to Latino people mainly, well, completely. And our congregation has known those people over the years. For one thing, we have a preschool, so most of their kids have been through our preschool at one time or another. And every one of those houses were flooded. And I heard the other day that the landlord collected rent the day before the hurricane, and then the day after the hurricane, they were all evicted because the homes are not habitable. And of course, they're not going to get back their rent.
Mhm.
And so it's, so we have done a lot. I mean, food, diapers, just kind of the necessities of life to help them. But it's because we know them already,
Mhm. Right.
and that's part of the whole thing, is just knowing people.
Right. I'll just share one little example also of showing up and what a difference it's made. The Holocaust Museum is expanding and wants to talk more about other genocides and other events in history. So we got in touch with the Seminole tribe, and we went over there, the staff, we all went on a field trip over to visit the Seminole tribe, which is, a good couple hours to go over there and back and spend time talking. And it was so interesting that their reaction was gratitude for us coming there. They said, I can't tell you, how amazed we are that you actually came out to see us instead of having us come to see you, because that's what most people do. And so that's exactly what you're saying. It's showing up and going there. If we're the ones who want to build the bridge, we need to
Right.
go there. Don't have
Right.
them come to us. And so that was very well received. And we're looking forward to having a wonderful working relationship with them moving forward. Another question that we had was, in the film, we see Anne scold some boys for messing up the KKK display of materials and the KKK hood in the hallway of the school. Why did she think the display should stay intact? So afterwards, she straightens the hood, and for a brief moment, we see this look of terror and pain on her face. How did that scene make you feel?
For me, that was probably the most dramatic, sort of gut-wrenching. I think she left it because, for one thing, that had been part of the agreement. They were going to sing gospel music, and on the other side, they could have this display. And I think she was doing her part kind of to be part of the process, even though it was very hard for her. And the fact that she even put the hood back on, to me was pretty amazing. And then that, when she looked in those, there weren't eyes there, but in those 2 holes in that hood, it was just, I was right there with her, terrorized.
Mhm.
And also importantly, JP saw it. He
Mhm.
saw that whole thing.
Right.
And that, I think, also hit him in another way.
Yep.
That said a lot.
Mhm.
So that was important in a lot of ways.
It was. Yep.
I'd just like to add that in summary, we have a saying, RESPECT, and when you learn to respect others, they will learn to respect you.
Right.
And on that note, this scene made me feel very conflicted because on one hand, she is telling these boys to respect a group of people who are committed to the destruction of her and her people. And as a Jew, I don't know if I could ever do that with Nazi or KKK paraphernalia. It makes me sick to my stomach just to think about it. On the other hand, to follow up on what Vincent was saying, she was almost radically demonstrating the principle of respect, respecting people with whom we have differences. And I think that's especially important and relevant in today's society because we're seeing this rise in a liberalism where we are unable or unwilling to listen to each other's thoughts if they are different than perhaps what is accepted or the status quo, at least in our certain communities. So, we talk a lot about this polarization, and that is because of this illiberalism and our unwillingness to disagree but respect with others. And there's a statistic that 1 in 5 American adults believe that political violence is justified in at least some political or some circumstances, which is almost 50 million people. So letting that sink in for a bit, the idea that 50 million Americans believe that political violence is justified in some circumstances is really, really scary. And so I think, and doing this act was this, I almost feel like it's, like I said, it's kind of this radical display of what respect should be. And I think we could learn, even though I personally could never do that, I think we can learn a lot from that action. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is that it speaks to this concept of resilience, because we are going to be exposed to bad and harmful things in our life. It's inevitable. No matter what situation we are in or who we are, it's going to happen. So how do we take this negative things and help ourselves learn to address it and learn from it, and then transform it into something good, transform it into something bigger than ourselves, and make sure that we are using it to better humanity as a whole.
In addition to respect, I think the other thing one could say is, as JP was looking at her, it was also raised the issue of trust.
Mhm.
She said they could do that, and as painful as it was to her, she went ahead and made those boys put back the display and kept her word.
Mhm.
And I think that that was important going forward, that he could see that on some level, at least, he could trust if she was going to say something, that would probably happen.
Mhm.
So I think it was important in many different ways.
Yep.
Yes, I think Anne, she's just an amazing person with how trusting, how respectful, and how giving she is. The, her whole approach, I think, demonstrated she was helping CP with his son. And she was building bridges by being helpful and by being giving.
Mhm.
And CP and his group were using threats and terrorism to get their way.
Mhm.
And it really showed the contrast and which one came out to be the winner of, you know, the thing that would make the relationship work.
Well, I think he saw that also when she found out that the school teachers' vote was switched, and she knew what happened. And she confronted him with that. And then he realized also, I think exactly what you said on some level, that what he was doing as opposed to what they were doing. And for whatever reason, started to realize that that was wrong. I think, I hope.
Mhm. I think that's what turned the tide in the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the part that came after the movie, I mean, I was interested that the two of them kind of made a team and went around the country talking about this process. So not only did they change things in Durham, but how many other places did they have impact? I mean, it's really pretty fantastic. I think I am going to read the book.
Yeah, that was a fantastic, so interesting part. Would love to hear what else they worked on.
Yeah.
One of the other questions in the chat is, have any of you worked with a charrette in any other type of situation, and has it been successful?
Not by that name, but when we were in Dayton, Ohio, the Kettering Foundation has a program called National Issues Forum, and they paired a predominantly Black church with a predominantly white church, and like 10 people from each group would get together and talk about, in the materials, there was always a topic for each year. And so it wasn't like solving a particular issue like the movie, but it was talking about some issue of common interest. And they were successful. Mainly they were successful in helping people realize that, you know, everyone had the same goals. Everybody wanted their kids to be in good schools and, you know, not do drugs and, you know, have good medical care, whatever the issues were at the time of each different year. But it was very successful in the bridge building for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, we may not always use that term, but just community meetings, getting
Right.
people together to discuss things.
Right.
Susan, I most recently participated in a City of Naples charrette, particularly surrounded around the planning and development for the design district here. And it was absolutely amazing. Facts, figures, what would the community like to see? It was a enlightening, sharing moment. And I think that when you're trying to move collectively together, it gives other people an opportunity to voice their opinion and record a lot of that information, but at the same time make some pretty tough decisions about the direction of where the city is going, how far it's been, maybe what their successes have been, and how they want to see themselves in the future. So I thought charrettes really give people an opportunity to share, and I think that's great.
I think you really need a skilled facilitator. I was very impressed by the facilitator in the film as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Mhm. Right. I'm just reviewing some of the other messages in the chat. There's some comments that this film was quite a springboard for healthy discussion. You know, I think absolutely. I think if this can be shown to so many different audiences and to have a discussion like this, to really think about it, it makes a tremendous impact. There's also the message here that it's sad that today people cannot discuss issues in a civilized manner. And that word respect again,
Mhm.
to really, which is why I think the facilitator helped, because there were many times in that charrette experience where Anne or CP wanted to just walk away and said, you know, I can't do this, I'm walking away, I'm done. But he got them back together and to really think things through and to have maybe not full respect for the other person right away, but respect for the process and the fact that they did want to have a safe environment and good education for all of their children. And then that whole process eventually developed respect for one another and for other people involved in that process. But in today's world of sound bites and, you know, some quick little meme, it's hard to, that's not the hard work. The hard work is sitting down and getting to know people and understanding all sides of an issue.
Yep.
That's a good bridge builder.
Yep.
That's right. Julie, your work there, it sounds very important and very interesting. We're very happy to have gotten to meet you here today. Any other thoughts, any other experiences that you can share with us in your work on this topic?
I think the most important thing is that relationships evolve, and AJC's Atlanta's Black Jewish Coalition started in 1982 to campaign for the renewal of the Voting Rights Act in 1983. And it was co-founded by John Lewis and a Jewish activist named Cecil Alexander. And even at that point, the relationship between the Black and Jewish communities had changed from what it was during the Civil Rights Movement, which was different than what it was during the early 1900s when the communities were working together to campaign for anti-discrimination laws. And now the relationship is different. It's not bad. It's just different. There's new leaders and communities in both of our communities, and there is less knowledge of the history between our communities. And so that's something that we really work toward, is educating about the relationship between the Black and Jewish communities, the commonalities that we have, providing a space to discuss the differences that we have, and making sure that we continue that allyship that's so important and that is critical for making sure that the world is a better place.
Right. I think these ongoing conversations are so important here in Southwest Florida as well, because our population is constantly growing and changing.
Mhm.
And so we think about the history of an area like River Park or, you know, other diverse communities, and somebody who's just moved here from Ohio or wherever, they don't know very much about this community. And so those of us who've been here for a while, we can't just assume that people know the history. We have to bring new people in as well. And really make that part of the bridge building, is to bring new people along and let them know where the needs are, where progress has been made, and where work still needs to be done. So as we wrap up, any final words from the three of you?
No, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me. This was really great.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Kathy.
you.
Thank you, Julie. Vincent?
Oh, the same thing. It has been a pleasure to serve, and we would ask everyone to take the time out and pitch in. The city of Naples needs you to recover from Hurricane Ian, and so please come out, get in the way, make a contribution, and bring your lovely smile with you.
Right.
Vincent, is anybody coordinating the work in River Park?
The NAACP of Coleman County has been
Okay.
there September the 30th. And we are actively involved. We just completed stage 1, and that is the recovery effort, or relief effort, should we say, because there were a lot of people who were flooded out of their homes and really have a place to go because hotels are full now. So we had 12 packed days of 13-hour operations to feed and clothe and provide shelter and water. And so we are just about to plan stage 2, and that is to rehabilitate their homes. I must say 4 out of 77 homes were flooded in River Park.
How many? Did you say 40?
74 out of 77 homes were flooded in River Park.
Oh my gosh.
Fortunately enough, the Habitat for Humanity home survived the storm surge, and my hat goes off to Habitat for Humanity. They do a fantastic job.
They do.
The world.
They do. Well, that leads us into my pitch for our next film. Lisa Lefko from Habitat for Humanity will be one of our panelists
Good.
for our film about redlining and housing discrimination in lending and in other ways. That's on November 9th. That will be in person at the Paragon Theater on Vanderbilt and US 41, 6 p.m. Please buy your tickets ahead of time. And we have, as I said, Habitat for Humanity, a lawyer from Porter Wright, and a lender from Finemark Bank. So some very knowledgeable panelists to talk about this issue, both nationally and what's happening here in Southwest Florida. I would like to thank our sponsors of the Movies That Matter series. And I'd also like to point out the important news that we have decided to name the series the Steve Brzezina Memorial Film Series, in honor and in memory of Steve Brzezina, who passed away this year. Steve was a co-founder of the Movies That Matter series, an avid film buff, museum docent, and a very active volunteer in our community. And his wife, Rhonda, is here with us today. Hi, Rhonda. Other sponsors of this film series include Porter Wright, Rhonda Brzezina, Finemark Bank, Habitat for Humanity, Debbie Latus and Ben Post, Marcy Eisenstadt, Barbara Cantor, Jenny and Mel Kaplan, Ida and Jeff Margolis, Marcy Margolis, Alice Morandi, and Nancy Wiadro. So thank you so much to everyone who helps us with your generosity to continue to offer these programs. And our partners, we don't do this by ourselves. We have Jen Shoah of Southwest Florida, the Jewish Federation of Greater Naples, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Naples United Church of Christ, and Temple Shalom. And our committee, I have to thank our wonderful committee, Ida and Jeff Margolis, Jenny Segaloff, Marcy Cotton, Mel Kaplan, and Renee Bialik.